When the pioneers arrived here, they saw these great hills, they saw lots of woodland, farming opportunities, they saw 3 rivers coming together, 2 forming one flowing on west. We became known as the gateway to the west. Today, you stand on a hill and you see the same thing. Rivers, a great sweep of mountains, hillsides, and you see buildings. Buildings are everywhere in Pittsburgh. We started early, we built, we lost many to the Great Fire, and we rebuilt, and we are rebuilding again, but we are retaining all the time.
You got the whole history of American architecture spelled out within walking distance, just in downtown Pittsburgh. And it has to be saved. It has to be preserved. Architecture tells you you are someplace. You're not just any place. You feel it very obviously in Washington, D.C. or in New York. In Pittsburgh, you walk up Grant Street and you know you're in a place of importance. You also feel that a lot of variety is going on. It isn't dull.
Pittsburgh is probably the surprise in America. It's the most, in my view, European city we have. It's one that is so locked up and held back by rivers coming in on the sides that it's been so dense and so small scale and yet so high, the buildings. You look down streets and you see mountains on both sides. And it feels like I'm in a place that's so unlike the United States, where it's always the big horizons and the bigger views. And it's charming, it's unique, it's a place that will hold up over time and be probably the most unique place in America for these reasons. It is, because of all its constraints, perhaps most magical, because it can do only so much. And within that, look how much has happened and evolved over time.
Pittsburgh is such a distinctive city because of the architecture, the bridges, the landscape, and the people who have been here and who have made history. And because of the positive role that historic preservation has played in creating a certain ethic and grassroots culture to hold on to the important, unique features of our main streets, of our communities, of our larger city.
I've learned more about the meaning of place to people, and how people can experience these buildings in ways that it's very difficult to even describe. These are feelings, and people become, why do people become so attached to buildings?
When I first came to Pittsburgh, I remember vividly belching steel mills, just glowing red steel mills, smoke, just vibrance. And you heard the stories of how Pittsburgh produced X percentage of the steel used in World War II. And I mean, they're just amazing stories about the dynamic of this city and what it's done in history.
Steel, the nation builder, plays the leading role in the development of America by supplying transportation essential to development and use of our great natural resources.
Probably 4 years later, they were all closed. 125,000 people laid off. That's just an immense change. And from that low point in Pittsburgh, you wondered where was it going to go? And fortunately, what we became was an educational center, a mecca for robotics, software, hardware, just amazing changes and advances in the computer business, massive healthcare institutions that are second to none in this country. It's a community that has a great future and has pride in itself.
You find yourself with this amazing landscape, and then you discover there's a great deal of extremely interesting architecture of all kinds, residential, industrial, ecclesiastical. And you also discover that there's a lot of variety. First of all, this city has 18th century roots. The first professional architects around the time of the Civil War were trained in Germany. After that, they went to Boston, and from Boston they often went to Paris, to the École des Beaux-Arts, and then they came to Pittsburgh to set up their offices. Probably the most important American architect of the 19th century, Henry Hobson Richardson's last two great buildings, Emmanuel Episcopal Church and the Allegheny County Courthouse, are here in this city. This was a place in 1890 that a lot of young men who were here doing work on some other project said, hey, why don't we set up our own firm? And so they did. Then as you gradually discover more about them, not only the architects but also the craftsmen, folks working in metal and in stained glass, you discover that there's some very impressive folks here. And then as you inch your way into the 20th century, you discover a lot of firsts. The first aluminum skyscraper is here. The use of steel and glass and aluminum and other materials. Westinghouse Light. Very importantly, not very far out of town, we have Frank Lloyd Wright's Fallingwater. We have a wonderful building by Mies van der Rohe. We have a wonderful building by Richard Meyer. We have major work by Michael Graves. There's just a lot of extraordinary stuff. Or there are things that are still here that aren't anywhere else. Joseph Urban, the great Viennese designer, he designed a series of ballrooms in hotels. The last ballroom that he designed is the one that's in the William Penn Hotel, largely intact. So the city turns out to be full of surprises.
Pittsburgh, when I was a child, was a streetcar city. City meant downtown, and that's where you went to shop. There were 5, 7 at one point department stores, and Fifth Avenue was lined with retail stores. That was disrupted when the authorities said streetcars are in the way of the automobiles. Did away with a system that brought everybody into work and took everybody back home and back on Saturday perhaps to shop. We started putting money into highways. The highways brought up the suburbs, gave people an alternate place to live, in many cases white flight. And then urban renewal came along and tore out the heart of our major areas. Fortunately, it got stopped, or more would be gone. All of North Side would be gone.
The truly dynamic American cities are those that are coming to grips with the problem of outmoded structures. Increasingly, we are seeing large-scale demolition as the first step in building modern cities. Obsolescence runs through all types of property, including some of our finest mansion homes. These too will bow to demolition, and as they pass from the American scene, strategic land will be cleared for new use. In this jet age, events move fast, faster indeed than we sometimes realize, and our progress is certain to be steady as we clear away the structures that block progress.
Things started to change in the 60s because of urban renewal. Urban renewal had done so much to wipe out historic neighborhoods and just good, plain, solid neighborhoods that people were concerned that cities were losing too much. In the late 60s and early 1970s, preservation was very much a small, kind of elite group of people who cared about special buildings but had no real political backing. And in New York City in particular, when Penn Station was torn down, there was no real preservation movement. There was a small handful of people.
1966 is the National Historic Preservation Act, and the National Register of Historic Places is established. And so we begin to get a sense that we have got to do something, and this becomes a nationwide movement. There are obviously movements similar to it already in place in Europe and Britain, but that's when there's a change of attitude.
And in 1970s, things really came to a head because of the fight over Grand Central in New York. And Jackie Kennedy joined forces with the local preservationists and really put preservation on the national map. And I would say it's been growing in leaps and bounds ever since.
We're desperately trying to get the great architecture around Grand Central landmarked because there's always room for new construction in the city. We're not against development, but you don't want to lose the best of what you have in order to do that.
Pittsburgh was probably the first city in the country to go headlong, mistakenly, into the urban renewal mode, bulldozing so much of the fabric of its city as well as its economic heart. So it's somewhat ironic that Pittsburgh also became the leader in the preservation movement under Arthur Ziegler and Pittsburgh History and Landmarks Foundation.
Our organization began really by accident back in 1964. An out-of-work architectural historian, Jamie Van Trump, who was just beginning to write. He'd been researching for years. He was beginning to write beautifully about Pittsburgh architecture. And I cut through Manchester on the way out of town. And we went down Liverpool Street and were amazed at the townhouses there, Victorian townhouses dating from about 1870. We got out, we were looking at them. A man came up and said, "What are you looking at?" We said, "We're looking at these wonderful buildings." He said, "You better look fast. The Urban Redevelopment Authority is going to demolish them." We knew nothing about preservation or government processes. We did know that we didn't much care for the kinds of urban renewal that were going on at the time, massive demolitions. So we got started. And the first thing we did was, of course, meet with the people in the neighborhood, learn from them, and develop a program together. There was no real citizens organization, and we weren't a real organization, so we grew up together.
The interesting thing about Pittsburgh History and Landmarks Foundation is that it was founded by two people, and as an organization, it's always had the character of those two people. Arthur Ziegler always would see preservation as a way to revitalize a community through real estate development. Jamie Van Trump, co-founder, always was about the research. What made a building an architectural landmark? Who lived there? Who worked there? Who was the designer of that building? So there was always an educational aspect. So our organization has always had, in some ways, this double-edged sword, so it was very effective.
Liverpool Street, of course, is our first street. It got us going in preservation. It enabled us to learn how to stop then the redevelopment authorities from demolition, and it became our iconic street, to which we still feel very deeply. We bought a house. We learned quickly we had to buy first and reassure people, and we restored it. That house is looking very good today, 50 years later. There was a singular large house called the Longenheim after the family that was living there. It became vacant, it deteriorated, and behind Liverpool Street was a milk company. I got a call one day from a North Sider who said the milk company is going to acquire the Longenheim house and destroy it for a parking lot. You have to get down here. We got down there. Somehow we found, I think it was around $8,000 or $9,000 we bought the house. We restored it. We worked with the citizens. Ultimately, we turned it over to them, and they decided it should be a senior housing apartments, and they ran it then, and that house was looking very good today. Liverpool Street is a magnificent street for Pittsburgh. Victorian houses, the Longenheim House, and then one corner next to the Longenheim House is a row of stone front Richardsonian Romanesque houses. And because Richardson designed our courthouse, and it was such an important building, the major building of his career, known worldwide, Romanesque architecture became very popular in the 1890s in Pittsburgh.
First time I met Arthur, I threatened him. Arthur was engaged in restoring a house in the 1300 block of Liverpool Street. I was hired directly by Manchester to think through a strategy as to whether or not land clearance would be the best way to pursue community revitalization. Arthur Ziegler was looking at a program in terms of if he bought property in each individual block, whether or not he could save blocks. Back then, it wasn't a simple preservation move. What most people tend to forget is that in Washington, D.C., Chicago, Pittsburgh, Albany, New York, after the death of Dr. Martin Luther King, there were riots. And I didn't grow up in an all-black neighborhood. I grew up in a mixed community. And after the riots, people fled. There was massive flight from the inner city all around the country. The urban renewal program called for land clearance. It had no resources made available for restoration. So Landmarks had to help us think through a complicated strategy of financing the preservation movement in the community.
From Manchester, we moved to Central North Side. We thought, gee, Central North Side, no image, what is it? And then we noticed one corner facing North Avenue had a series of perpendicular streets named after battles in the Mexican War. Turned out it was laid out during and after the Mexican War, and so we created the Mexican War streets, and it caught on. And there, just like Manchester, we also learned that when we get everybody together and everybody agrees and everybody likes a program, it is invariable that we have to buy the first buildings and restore them. We went to Allegheny West, East Allegheny, and then generally Central North Side. We went over to South Side. South Side was in good shape. It was a steelworker neighborhood. Carson Street, 18 blocks of retail, was going downhill rapidly. There were 27 vacant storefronts when we arrived. We worked with the merchants and the building owners, and we created what became known across America as Main Street. We did it in the form of marketing, and we marketed that street as the longest Victorian shopping street in America. Didn't know if it was quite right, but it sounded good and it worked. Everything leased and is still leased today. Main Street caught on, became a National Trust program, a Commonwealth of Pennsylvania program, and many other states have it as well. However, first thing we had to do was buy a building and restore it. This is back in 1969. We did the unprecedented thing of converting the vacant upper floors to apartments, and they all leased. Immediately, developers started buying buildings and putting what are now called lofts in them. The programs in these neighborhoods made us a recipient of many requests for help in many neighborhoods. One of the things we did was watch the development of community development corporations. They came into existence and then became stronger. And so we were selling our real estate off as needed. We did not want to keep it. And we were taking that money, making a revolving fund, and doing more real estate as needed. We converted that to a loan fund and loaned it to CDCs, high risk, lower rates, so that we would magnify preservation instead of us just doing it. Now you have all these groups doing it, and our money just kept seeding. And that loan fund is still in existence today. People are still borrowing and doing and repaying.
Station Square was a game changer nationally. It was a visionary project. It was innovation of the highest kind. It was such an odd idea to make something new out of something old and combine new with old. It got a lot of national attention. It was really impressive. Every aspect of it, not just the combination of turning this extraordinary building into a real attraction as a restaurant and bringing retail into the area, but the way they wove in artifacts on the site and made it a waterfront project, not just a land project.
When we began Station Square, we wanted to demonstrate a belief in Pittsburgh, a belief in preservation, and a belief in how to do urban renewal. The first thing we did was take possession of the first floor of the P&L Railroad building, which was the waiting room for the trains. When we came along, there was one train to Beaver Falls left a day. We wanted a restaurant, and we were in a city that had very few restaurants. There were 2 restaurant families, and that was really it. And we believed it had a market here that hadn't been recognized. So we set out to find a restaurateur. Took 2 years, and we found Chuck Muir from Detroit. He believed in the city. He said, I will build the biggest restaurant in Pittsburgh, and I will glass in the covered walkway that you want to have enclosed for dining. Even though everyone says no one wants to eat beside a railroad track, Pittsburghers are forgetting what's across the river and the view they're going to have. Rail, water, and buildings, lights at night. And Chuck Muir built it. He said, I will do $2 million the first year, and he did $3 million the first year. It has been running now since 1978, and it is still doing very, very well. People want to come to the Grand Concourse when they have something special going on in their lives. They want to bring their families, their visitors to town. It is a very popular restaurant with a very long life for restaurants. Station Square had very good shops, excellent public space. It had a hotel, office space, it had excellent parking.
Here's a developer who actually sees preservation as a way of redeveloping. And it was like a big shock because I had never met a preservation developer before who could have such a big view of many buildings and lots of public spaces, including really unusual assets of rail stations and even a freight line running right down the waterfront in front of dining, etc.
The Children's Museum really owes its existence in some ways to Pittsburgh History Landmarks. They saved the post office building, and we would not have been in this beautiful building. We would not be in this neighborhood. We would not be doing the work that we're doing in the neighborhood if Pittsburgh History Landmarks hadn't stood, in front of the bulldozers. And you have to credit Arthur Ziegler for that. We've been blessed with these great buildings, and it's because of this almost ferocious will to preserve the past. The history of the Children's Museum starts back in the early 1980s. A group of women from the Junior League got together and said that they really wanted to start a museum. Arthur Ziegler offered the basement of the old post office building. Then in the late 80s, they took over the whole museum. And then in 2004, we had another major move when we built the addition in between the old Buell Planetarium and Children's Museum. The buildings are of three different centuries. You have the 1889 post office, the 1939 planetarium, and then you've got the 2004 lantern building. If you stand in front of the museum, you can see every 50 years the building styles. The post office is just a little jewel box with this amazing dome that sometimes I will actually go downstairs and lay on the floor and look up because it's so extraordinary, and I realize that children are doing that all the time. If you're in a stroller, you're looking up. We have these three beautiful buildings that somehow all work together. We really want kids to appreciate good design, and I think that the buildings reflect that.
This was a major building converted to a children's museum. I mean, this was extraordinary. Of course, it fed the whole neighborhood dynamic that was unfolding, and it was very important that they sort of evolved reasonably at the same time, because you wouldn't have had the same kind of response to the museum if the neighborhoods around it weren't already being transformed.
Landmarks through the years has developed a number of tools to implement historic preservation. Those tools change. They change with need, they change with funding sources, they change with temper of the times. But Landmarks has a set of principles from which we do not vary. One of those is we can arrive on any scene by our own volition, a preservation scene where we think there is a need, or we are invited, usually by a building owner or a neighborhood group. We try to learn from the people who were there first. We do not come in with any ready-made answers, and we try to build from the grassroots up, and we try to bring in funding sources that are available, whether it's private, public, individual, and marry them to the local need. We want at the end of a year not to say, how many pages of documents did we produce studying something? We want to say, how many bricks did we put mortar between?
Under Pittsburgh History and Landmarks Foundation, more preservation has been done for low-income people than anywhere else I've seen in the country. And they've proven that preservation and affordability are compatible. And that is such a hard message to be accepted anywhere. The idea that poor people didn't want to live in old houses, this was ridiculous. They preferred those high-rise, antiseptic public housing. Of course not. They were neighborhood people. They were people who knew how to live on a street and on a stoop and on a porch.
Most people may not understand how intricately linked or intertwined preservation is with their daily lives.
Easements are a major tool for us. Easements protect the exterior of a building. It cannot be changed without our consent. The building cannot be demolished. The Neville House is a good example of a really historic building, 1787. It's out in Collier Township, and it was jeopardized some years ago. We didn't have any money to buy it and maintain it, but we bought it anyway. And we set about to raise some money to put it in better shape. Started with the roof, the downspouts, the gutters, the things that keep the water out. Then we were very lucky that a group of people came together as volunteers and wanted to use the property. And the colonial dames of America got interested in furnishing the house. So for some years, we all worked together to save this house. But our desire is always not to continue to own property and not to run museums. So we ultimately turned the house over, like the Children's Museum, to a volunteer group which is running it today.
We've had a 40-year partnership with Pittsburgh History and Landmarks, and it's been a very successful one, starting with this house as an unrestored, unfinished, pseudo-modern building to having it fully restored to the way it looked in the late 18th and early 19th centuries is really quite an accomplishment. John Neville is arguably one of the most prominent individuals in Western Pennsylvania and arguably the wealthiest in the 1790s. 1776, he leaves to head east to serve in many of the major battles of the Revolutionary War. Starting with Anne and Nancy Neville, they began to sign the windows here. The oldest one being Nancy Neville, April 20th, 1811. Visitors, friends, acquaintances that visited the house were invited to sign the windows with diamonds.
Bedford Springs Hotel, a glorious piece of Victorian architecture. And of course, the centerpiece is classical. But all of the frame additions with all those lovely ornate porches are Victorian and added on and added on. And here is this marvelous, unique establishment in the Allegheny Mountains. The building closed, and it seemed as if it could never be revived. Way too expensive, and it's really off the beaten path. A fellow got involved in new ownership a short time ago. He asked us if we'd like an easement. We said we would, and he gave it to us. We went up and inspected construction along the way. We're really pleased, and like all easements, we visit that site. Our construction manager does this work once a year and makes sure everything is intact. Now here, the easement expanded. We took control of the land around the hotel and then later took control of the historic golf course.
As part of the inspection, we inspect all the details. Those, in this particular case, include the railings, the tongue and groove flooring, and the unique wood ceilings. Even the ceilings have a historic color that was researched. It has a beautiful light sky blue. We are looking at the wood clapboard, the window configuration. At this side of the resort, these windows are known as 6/6. Also on this side, you'll notice that the old wood screen doors are still in place. You have the half-round gutters, the eave tubes, and the round downspouts located on all the roof lines. Those are the original style gutters and downspouts.
We have 42 easements today. They include farms out in the surrounding counties. They include the Heinz Lofts and the Armstrong Corks and the Carlisle downtown and the Burks Building downtown and the little blue and white terracotta Buell Building. All of those are under our protection. And when I'm gone, the easement remains. When the building owner's gone, the easement remains. That is one of the least expensive ways to protect buildings. It is, in the United States, the only way to permanently protect a building other than owning it.
go look at every building that has a plaque on it and read the story of this building. It's almost like having a Department of Interior here. It's almost like Landmarks having the National Register of Historic Places by plaquing and saving buildings, partnership and doing.
One of the interesting things about PHLF as a preservation entity is that it understands real estate economics. And that's key to evaluating what investments might produce and what their value might be to the community. I've always been involved in commercial real estate in Pittsburgh, and you always create value when you build things. Well, you certainly create value by restoring things, and they're part of our heritage, and they're an important part of our heritage.
We had a mayor who I thought would be grassroots, but who turned out to instead work from ideas he had and impose them. And he wanted to demolish about 64 historic buildings downtown, half the city's first historic district, Market Square. He called me to show it to me. I said, no, we just can't accept this. We tried to work out a compromise. There was none to be had, and many people opposed this. We took the lead. Ultimately, we won. We commissioned a plan during this altercation by Stan Extott, a marvelous planner, and we did the Fifth Floor's master plan. What we said was, this is a very historic area. We should not demolish it, but we should allow for growth. And so we said 3 blocks are less important. Not important, but less important architecturally. They could be taken down, and new construction should go in. In the meantime, we won the battle and immediately found what we had to do was buy a building and invest in it. Same old story. We are going to put apartments in, see if they'll work, bring people into town. There had only been 1 building done at that time, and we are going to put in retail. Just as when we started Station Square 30 years earlier, people said it'll never work. We put in a men's store. It worked so well that 2 leading men's stores in the city and other locations moved down within a block of our men's store. We put in a men's shoe store that was a second-generation Pittsburgh establishment, and we did 7 apartments, and they all leased. That turned downtown Pittsburgh thinking around, and some other developers came in, bought other buildings that Tom Murphy said could never be reworked, and reworked them all. There's good retail, there's restaurants, and there's apartments above. And so downtown gained a new momentum.
We were fortunate that we were doing retail and other developments like that in other cities, and I saw immediately there were plenty of sites that we could build new without destroying the old fabric while maintaining all the historic pieces that the historic elements dominate, not the new. But it was all there. It was almost Fifth and Forbes telling us what to do.
Everyone said, well, people are moving downtown, they need a grocery store. Grocery store was tried and failed. A group came to us, developers, restaurant owners that we know, and said, we'd like to do a grocery store in your building. We have worked together. The grocery store is open, functioning, and it feels, as many people say, a lot like Manhattan, and it's doing quite well. The adjacent Market Square was not in very good condition. That has been entirely redone through the work of a foundation in the city, and we were involved in the planning of it. And downtown is as lively as can be, but we are still on the path of retail. Everyone finds it easy now to lease to restaurants and bars. We're showing that retail will work, and it's very much needed if people are going to live there.
Barbara Tuchman, a wonderful historian, once said that there was no trick to getting people interested in history. Tell stories. Take people to the place that you're trying to save and tell the story of what happened there or who lived there. River towns are story towns, and this is a 3-river town.
It seemed to me, this was in the 70s, that preservation was always a matter of a crisis. I thought, gee, if people were just educated, they'd all be preservationists. And so we started an educational program, and I encountered a marvelous woman, Louise Sturgis, and she has built that program year by year. It now has 12,000 youngsters in it and hundreds of adults, and that has spread into not just classes in classrooms, but making classrooms on the streets with the kids, get them to go and look at their buildings, write about their buildings, photograph their buildings, sketch the details, and also even write a play about their building.
One thing that makes us different from all other preservation groups in this nation is that we have a comprehensive education program for preschool through 90 years, 100 years. And we are out there in the community educating people about local history and architecture. Why is it important to do that? Because the more you know about a place, the more you love it. If you don't know something about a particular building or place, you're much more likely to throw a rock through a window, spray graffiti on a bridge or a building. If you know about a place, you know about the engineer, the workman, the people involved in creating it, you know about the beauty and the artistry of that landmark because people have helped give you the words to describe it, then you suddenly start to care. If you start to care, then you might, in the end, as an adult, become an advocate for what we believe in, which is keeping the special places in this city that are historical, that are of great beauty, and of value as part of our continuing city. I think our programs are very important because they help root people in a community, they help give people a sense of belonging, and they also give people a voice. And I can say that through our poetry and art books and through many of the publications we do where we give kids the chance to sketch a detail and then write about it, we publish their work. We give them a book with their work in it, and they see that their artwork and that their ideas matter, and they form a personal connection to that detail. Once you start to have a person connect with a building, then again, they're more likely to care for it.
Louise, the things that she has done with school groups and schools and kids to really kind of bring architecture alive, we all could learn from what she's done. Pittsburgh History Landmarks is working with kids. I mean, you don't think about it. You think about them saving buildings, but they're actually creating the next set of preservationists. People always focus on preservation because of the past, but I think it's preservation for the future.
As a good preservationist, one of the things we have to do on a continual basis is help people recognize, understand, and see it. It's right before you. The difficult challenge, though, is for those who are the portion among us who don't have the time. If we can help them understand the joy of it, even in their difficult lives, you've met the mark. You've met the mark. That's why Louise's program is so important in the schools.
We have in Wilkinsburg a preservation resource center, and it has been a beacon of light in that neighborhood, bringing people from all over the region and even the tri-state to hear the programming. We have seminars, we have lectures. People are really interested in learning about historic buildings and all that goes on around historic buildings, how you restore historic doors or stained glass, and hearing lectures on architecture. And that's right in the middle of all this development we have.
We have always had a full-time architectural historian on our staff. We need that knowledge. Every one of those people is not only very knowledgeable, but they write beautifully. We publish what they write, and they write major books. They write pamphlets, periodical articles, hardbound books, paperbound books. We have a book coming out almost every 2 years.
We're unusual in having architectural historians. A lot of practical preservation organizations don't, but also our practical preservation people are extremely involved and on the streets and doing the things that need to be done. You need both of those things. The first architectural historian was James D. Van Trump, who was the co-founder of Landmarks. Jamie was a Pittsburgh kid. I was lucky enough to know him for the last 4 years of his life. I came in 1990, he died in 1994, but he was our first historian. Then Walter Kidney, who also had roots in Western Pennsylvania, And then I joined. And we have all been involved with very practical things. I have to do research. We've all spent a lot of time in libraries and reading books. We've also spent a lot of time with people, looking at buildings and talking about them and listening to what people say about them, so that the preservation aspect is part of it and the educational component is equally important just in terms of the understanding. Because if people don't feel that this is worth doing, there's no point in going further.
Walter Kidney was a genius. He grew up in the Johnstown area, then Philadelphia, but then chose to come to Pittsburgh, much like Al Tandler chose to come to Pittsburgh. And by being an outsider and coming here, they could look at this area with fresh eyes and they could say, wow, what you have here really matters. Where sometimes people in a hometown take it for granted. Walter talked about built things as the glamorous hardware of civilization. And so we're all about saving and protecting and finding new uses for this glamorous hardware of civilization that helps us pass on the story of our city to the next generation. It's so easy to take people into the blockhouse, the oldest building in the city of Pittsburgh, 1764, and have them imagine why the soldiers built that, and have them hear the story of how it then became an apartment, a house, and now a museum. They understand what recycling is and adaptive reuse just because of the presence of that building.
History is a process, and history as the accumulated stuff in a place. You look at a watercolor of the Point in 1818, and you then look at pictures of what the city looked like in 1940, and something has happened that's drastic. But today, if you walk down to the Point and you look up, you look at the rivers and you look at Mount Washington, you can relate to that 1880 view in a way that it wasn't possible until the 1970s and 80s. So there's a sense in which a lot of what was there and what kinds of things were there have been recaptured. And you only know that if you study the past.
When I first came to Pittsburgh, my wife and I lived in Wilkinsburg. That was a long time ago. It was a very diverse community at that time. Once I got into the commercial real estate business, and a couple of decades down the road, it was a very different community. It had become distressed. In fact, the area where I lived had become distressed. And the effects that PHLF has had on Wilkinsburg are significant.
Wilkinsburg is a first-tier suburb of Pittsburgh, the city of churches, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in around the city 50, 60, 70 years ago. And it's changed a lot. It has suffered a lot of population loss. Businesses have left. The main street, half of it is pretty much gone. I mean, the number of vacant structures in that community is unbelievable, you know. And what's even harder to believe is how many tax liens you have on property, all around. In terms of even selling homes, you didn't even know if you could restore a house and sell it. You know, the average house price at the time when we started was around $54,000. That's a restored, that's the highest comp we could find. It was gonna take a lot more than that to restore these houses. We went in to do that initial piece of work with funding partners who thought that we could do something. They really believed in Landmarks, in its ability to start to change what was happening out there. And we got to work on 4 homes. We gutted these structures, we restored all that we could. The facades were completely intact and restored, and we brought families of low to moderate income into these buildings. We knew we were doing pretty good when we got every house under agreement a year before they were actually completed.
It was nice that we found houses that were already fixed up and we didn't have to fix them up, but it also they weren't super expensive. They weren't outside of our budget, which was a big thing. So we went from looking at houses that needed a lot of work and had to be all fixed up to a house that was already done. And so we jumped at that chance to kind of have an older house, because that's what we like. We like the older houses of Pittsburgh. I mean, they're beautiful and the brick and everything, but it was already all done inside.
I am a large history geek. I'm actually a history teacher at Pittsburgh Urban Christian School just up the street. And one of the things we really loved about the location of the house was it's a 5-minute walk to work for me. And I just like the idea of living in an old building, something that's been here and has some history. Even if I don't know the specifics of that history, I like the fact that it's all around me. I also really enjoy the care that was put into redoing the building. There were details and things that could have easily been passed over, but were done well.
I came to Pittsburgh in 2010 from the New York City area. I came because I knew that Pittsburgh was a really cool place and I could accomplish the goals and dreams that I had here in Pittsburgh more than I could really any other place. I wanted to own a historic home. I wanted to be involved in the community. I really fell in love with Regent Square and Wilkinsburg. The fact that it was a beautiful 1892 Queen Anne house on the corner and so much love had gone into bringing it back to what it once was super appealing to me. I have found the community here to be really welcoming and really diverse in all the best ways. Historic homes are in my blood. I grew up in a historic home and have always been taught the value of these solidly built beauties.
The neighborhood certainly isn't what it once was, but we think it's on its way back. And our data analysis shows that in the Hamlet Street area where we're creating a kind of a nexus, a core, and seeing it ripple out, that's happening.
We got to work really on our biggest developments out in Wilkinsburg, which were sizable apartment buildings in key locations, key corners, and a concentration of them. So we're not just doing one building here, one building there. Our latest, it just closed on financing last month, and it's a $11.5 million, 33-unit affordable housing development on 5 different sites. So again, we're spreading our wings. We're not just at one site. We are really spreading this out. And that means we're going to get impact in areas that haven't had impact like this in a long time. We're going to be able to put millions of dollars into this neighborhood that hasn't seen this level of investment in a very long time.
We came to recognize that there was a large contingency of people who admired our religious buildings, the architecture. There's also a large contingency of people who use those buildings for social purposes, and I don't mean just card playing. I mean outreach services to neighborhoods, whether it's free services for the Boy Scouts or the food fair. We developed a grant program for religious properties. We give grants every year. We've given over 250 of them. We've given away over $1 million. And we also give technical services to help them figure out what they need to do. We have 2 criteria for those grants. 1, is the architecture really significant? 2, do they provide services to their neighborhood? One of our hallmark constructions is not architecture, it's engineering. It's bridges. We have little bridges that you don't even know you're crossing that go over little streams, gullies, ravines. We have big bridges like the Point Bridges, and we have all kinds of construction of bridges. And of course, we were the home of American Bridge down at Am Bridge. The bridges are a fascinating collection of engineering monuments, and there's every type here. Some are gone. We wanted to, first of all, see that the bridges were appropriately painted, not just all painted one color. Used to be silver, then it turned into Aztec gold with a golden triangle. We painted the Smithfield Street Bridge when we fought for its restoration, the colors that you see today. The other aspect of bridges is we thought they should be seen at night, and many can be dramatically lighted. And we set out first to light Smithfield, which came to Station Square, is our oldest bridge and is our most pedestrian-used bridge. We did that. Then we thought we ought to develop a plan for the 3 Sisters bridges, 6, 7, and 9 over the Allegheny. We did that. We wanted to paint one for the ballpark and Roberta Clemente, and we developed a lighting plan for it and raised the funds largely from the light company, Duquesne Light. It was a very expensive proposition. We did raise the funds for the Hot Metal Bridge, the South Side Works, It's an important bridge for vehicles and the other half of it, as it were, for pedestrians and bikers. And we just lighted each end with an orange light that can change its glow like the steel mill did that was located right at that site. And so we have 3 done, a couple of thousand to go. We have a staff today of around 25. We have always felt we should have a diverse staff and not an artificially created staff. Good people who come along and we recognize them. We have also had, almost from the beginning, a staff that is very close to being 50-50 male-female. And we also, these days, because I've gotten a little older since 1964, have to look toward the future, trying to look toward the future. And I strongly believe in the continuation of this organization organically. And so we have hired a younger staff, and they are immersed in our culture. They're automatically in it, and they are going to carry this organization into the future.
When we look at preservation in the future, it will, for me, depend on this one key area. Who and what are the preservation leaders that you're training today? Because if you don't do that and do it well and get it right, it's not going to happen.
In the rest of the country, I've noticed in recent years as I've spoken with other people that there are places where laws have been weakened or districts have been rescinded or people have decided that a particular category is in and out. We've never gotten to where the environmentalists are with a really widespread understanding of why that's important. And I think if you pulled enough people there for preservation, but I think we still have enormous work to do on a political level, on an outreach level. We've done enormous good. We're still fighting for recognition and acceptance. And at the same time, I think we've learned to expand it so that everyone understands the benefits.
Arthur understood so early what Jane Jacobs taught us, and that it's all one system. It's like an ecology. You can't deal with one element and not deal with the rest. He also understood that you can't persuade them. You just have to fight them. What he understood was that he had to figure out a way to get it done without waiting for civic leadership to understand.
Preservation is messy. It is not a precise science. In many neighborhoods, it is elitist, it's white, and it has nothing to do from the point of view of the people who live there. If you went back and examined many neighborhoods, they will tell you that gentrification came at the expense of the poor. In some instances, that's very true. Does it have to be that way? No. The lessons learned then that I would look at doing differently today is that when you look at an economic development strategy, it is not a public-based strategy. Most housing in America is sold by the private sector. And because of the riots and because of what happened in many of our neighborhoods, we thought, and some still do think, that the best route for corrective measures is to bring in what we term affordable housing exclusively. And it needs to be a mixed income strategy.
Invention and innovation comes by just as much dealing with what's already there and preserving as it is starting afresh, which just doesn't seem either realistic or even sustainable. So the impact of preservation, I think, with more architects thinking this way, is probably a more rational and maybe more valued approach to architecture that is spreading around throughout the United States. I mean, truly, all the places that suffered from lack of economic development and therefore were not destroyed have turned out to be in most places the most valuable.
I think there are several really strong preservation organizations in the country that also focus on helping people fix buildings and technical capacity. But I think Pittsburgh's in a league of its own. Pittsburgh, to me, is the biggest, the best, the longest running show in preservation.
Pittsburgh has been through violent fires, floods, strikes, the Depression, but it always gets back up on its feet, figures out what went wrong, and tries to remedy that by doing it right the next time. The salvation, the rejuvenation of Pittsburgh in my lifetime has, to my mind, been one of the stunning accomplishments in our country and deserves more attention and credit.
When you think of your fondest memories in Pittsburgh, it's related to preservation. You cannot walk down a street in the city of Pittsburgh. You can't leave your job. You can't leave your environment without touching and being involved and enveloped in preservation. Just not possible.
The city, when we started, was still known as the Smoky City. It has been trying to find its way for a long time. It has begun, I think, to find it through the medical centers and the universities. We still have a long way to go, but right now there is a massive amount of development underway in Pittsburgh, and that is a very good sign. But that doesn't mean that all the disadvantaged neighborhoods are now advantaged. They are not. We are deeply involved in all of them. The visitor who comes here shares the same point of view that most of the people have who live here. We love our buildings and our neighborhoods.